That's been in the studio waiting to be finished for about 6 years, and I've only started to finish it today. So I've got a bit more. This is going to be an exhibition painting. Got an exhibition in November, so this will be one of the exhibition paintings. I don't know. It's some things you think, oh God, it's going to take me a while to finish that. I'll leave it till later. Then this one here has even been waiting longer. Probably, yeah, probably about 8 years. Most of the paintings are complete. So there's usually very few that have got to be finished. Or something like that. If I solidly painted would be about at least 60 hours. Yeah,
Really long.
it's a long time. I reckon I'm working for about 50p an hour. So no, it's not that bad. But yeah, if you think in terms of finance, it's very difficult when you're starting out to actually make a profit. That's a problem for young aspiring artists. I recently painted a big lighthouse for St. Luke's. That took 300 hours. It took me 3 months to paint that. That's a long time. It was much big. I'd allocated 6 weeks because I'd painted the Elmer previously, the launch Elmer many years ago, and that took me about 6 weeks. I only painted in the morning, so I'm not painting all day. So I allocated 6 weeks to that, but it was much bigger than I expected. And they've asked me to paint a small one for next year. I'm a patron of St. Luke's, so I like to offer support.
So you're going to say yes?
Yeah, so I got a small one to paint, but it isn't until February. I'm Brian Pollard, an practicing artist living in Plymouth. Although my original business was really working as a family doctor and a psychiatrist, but I've painted for at least 40 years in this kind of style since moving to Plymouth in 1977. Art was one of my favourite subjects at school from the very, very beginning, because when I was very young. But unfortunately, I had to give it up when I did A-levels. So I dropped out of the sort of art field about that time. But I've always painted, especially when I was studying at Birmingham, studying medicine, and when I was practicing down here. So it's always been something it's been in the background. But really on a serious painting regular basis, probably the last 45 years. Yeah, I mean, I started out looking at sort of representational painting, but the whole idea of the artwork was to relax and to chill out, and I've just found that frustrating. It would have taken me so long to be any good at it and get a good result. Whereas with this kind of painting, it doesn't matter how it comes out. It's naive. It's very difficult to be self-critical of it. And I found that more relaxing and more stimulating, and I like using bright colours, so that this was really the style that developed quite slowly at first, getting used to the paints in acrylics and realising in order to get these bright colours I had to use many coats. The blues have got 4 coats, the yellows have probably got 6 coats. So it's rather laborious, but I quite like that. I like the tedious nature of it. Many years ago, I used oil for about a week, and then I thought, no, I can't cope with this mess, all the turpentine and everything. So acrylics were coming into general use, and I found that they were perfect. They dry quickly. It means I can paint a few paintings at the same time. They are, but they have two disadvantages, the coats that we've mentioned. But the other disadvantage is when you put it on, the colour darkens slightly. So if you're a tonal painter, which I'm not, then I think it'd be far more difficult. They're great. You've got to get a good acrylic. These are Liquitex, which are really great acrylics. I use some Reeves for backgrounds when I'm using covering a lot of space. I think everybody finds their own medium. A lot of people now are using acrylics. I mean, most of the artists I talk to are painting in acrylics. We lived in Birmingham originally, or close to Birmingham, which is the sort of furthest point from the sea. So the one thing I wanted to do was move by the sea. I've always loved the sea. And, you know, we've got so much stimulation down here and inspiration. So sea comes into a lot of it. I really try and get colour in the idea of the balloons and the clouds, to get colour into areas where there's not usually a lot of colour. So when you see these odd things in it, aeroplanes, the red arrows, it's just to fill the space. I like to have the paintings busy. I like lots of people. I like lots of things going on. So somebody's got a lot to look at when they look at the painting. And I just enjoy the detail. My past, yeah, I was brought up in a place called Bloxwich, which is a small area just outside Walsall, which is close to Birmingham. I lived there until actually I originally qualified as a pharmacist before I studied medicine. So I eventually ran a shop in that area, and then I came to London to manage a shop in Forest Gate for 12 months. Decided I was more interested in diagnosis and treatment and more contact with the patient. So I applied and luckily got into Birmingham Medical School, where I went in when I was 26. So I started that late, and I qualified in 77, and then moved down to the sea. Had to do what we call house job, junior doctor's jobs, which were 120-hour weeks. Can't believe it. You worked for a month, and you worked every single day on that month and 3 of the nights. And then the next month you worked in the weekdays and 4 of the nights. So then I went into general practice, enjoyed that, and later psychiatry was a big interest of mine. I was invited to do a job at a crisis intervention centre as part of the National Health, which was really very interesting. Being a doctor can be quite depressing, as you can imagine, as can psychiatric work. And so it was the brightness of the colours to cheer me up, you know. I did, yeah, when I could. Obviously, I didn't do so much then, but I'd often get up early, 6 o'clock, do a bit of painting before I went into surgery. And maybe at night if I was able. I leave that little edge bit because every cloud has a silver lining, and that will be put in pure white, which will contrast with the 2 greys. Corny as it is, people all don't notice. Do you know where the best place for me to have a painting hung in a house is? The toilet. Gets the best view. People actually sit and look at it. So when somebody says, I've got it hanging in the toilet, you say, thank you very much. Well, it's not what you expect, is it? Unfinished, not what people want to buy, along that line. Actually, there are 2 galleries. No, yeah, there were 2 actually, in London. And one, they both said the same thing, but one of them said it in a really nice way that wouldn't put you off, and the other one would make you think, God, I'm going to give up painting. I'll show you the publishers I work for. You might want a photograph. The biggest publishers in the country. If I can find it. Oh yeah, here we are. So a whole series of animal pictures.
Wow. When did you do these?
Oh, that catalogue's way 94.
Oh my god.
Was that 31? Oh, I don't want to talk about it. 31 years ago. 94. If you look around at that picture there, you see how the paintings start out. They start out by blocks of colour. See the people. See, so I put the clothes in, then the detail. You can see the balloons are starting to come along. I've just put these clouds in today. The problem with this picture is I had this space and I thought I can't fit clouds in. And then I thought, yeah, there is a way of fitting them in. I was looking at it the other day. So you can see how it's built up. So everything's painted. It's a bit like Lego. You put a base colour in and then you add something to it and then you add something else to that. When I'm working with children, some of the works over there, I get them to paint 3 zones of colour in the background. Green if you do in the hoe, one blue for the sea, a different blue for the sky, paint the background, and then paint on top. A lot of painters don't paint like that. They draw things in and paint around them. But once children start doing that, it gets very messy. So they can probably produce a better picture and give them more confidence by adopting that style. But it's not something I recommend. I mean, I've known some Royal Academy painters very well, and if they were painting a figure, they'd draw the figure in and paint round it. I suppose that's the way you probably, I don't know how you taught at art school, I got no idea. But this is just a technique that suits me. But it is laborious. As I've got older, I'm 80 next year, so I don't, like you were mentioning, I don't have the energy I used to. So I don't do so many, but I've done hundreds of schools, hundreds. Most schools in Plymouth, and a lot of schools have it on the syllabus because it's so easy for the children to adapt to. Naive means childlike, and so it's ideal for children. I reckon the Hoe is one of the greatest views in the country, greatest sea view of any city without any doubt, I think. And I have a little place in Mousehole, and that's when I started really painting many years ago. And it's just a window looking over rooftops, but you just move your head and you've got a different view, and you look over there and there's a different view. There's 100 different paintings from just sitting in a chair at a window. So we've got great stimulation, and Dartmoor, of course. I love the moors, but the sea is a very big influence. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I like to, especially this one, which is relating it to Devonport. I move stuff around. This is a reasonably accurate picture of King Sand and Coruscant, but a lot of my paintings are, buildings are shifted, the colours changed. This is the colour I use for the dull Plymouth limestone. So grey doesn't go well in my paintings, so except if it's got patterns of tiles or something on it. So yeah, I move stuff around. Interestingly, I didn't paint Drake's Island in any of my pictures for about 30 years. Nobody noticed because it was a protest about it not being used as a recreation base for children, because it was used as a centre. Then somebody bought it and access started, and I started painting Drake's Island again about 5 years ago, which is just something nobody's ever said. Oh, where's Drake's Island? Yes, maybe they didn't like to. Yeah, that's St Andrew's Church, and you can't see Smeaton's Tower from there, but I put it in, and I do that on a lot of pictures. It gives it as a landmark. You only got to paint a bit of green at the sea and put in Smeaton's Tower, and Plymouth say, oh, people say that's Plymouth's Hoe, which is nice. Yeah, I put Italian ones. There's one of a Tuscan city here, San Gimignano. Those sunflowers have all had at least 6 coats of yellow. You can imagine that along that Turk. That's a picture of from the cottage window in Mousehole. Looking to the left, painted many pictures from there, and done lots of sketches from there. There's a London one, I think, up there. These are some animal paintings I did for a big London publishers many years ago that went off to Canadas in Japan and China and places. They were distributed all over the place. Yeah, often sketches. Photographs when I'm doing pubs, because there's a lot of detail and I can't stand outside the pub. I just do a quick outline. So when there's a building with a lot of detail, these two pub ones, no, one pub one, isn't it? The one pub one was done from a photograph, and St Andrews was done from a photograph with a lot of artistic license. Often they're memories. So when I'm traveling on the train to London and things like that, I see a view and I get an impression of it in my mind, and I had to take that back and paint it. So I do a lot of stuff from memory. That's why it doesn't look like anything. It's difficult to recognise somewhere. It's not an accurate representation. I don't have a photographic memory. Yeah. It's nice to use your imagination and decide what you'd like in the picture. I want this in the picture. I want that in the picture. How am I going to fit them in? Approach it from a storytelling point of view, almost. Well, don't try and make it exactly like the photo. If you think something doesn't work, then shift it, change the color, do anything. That's the great thing about an artist. You can do whatever you like. When a piece is finished, yeah, that's a good question. That's a difficult one. I have to look at it for a long time. First of all, I have to make sure that I haven't missed anything out, like left some feet of people, or faces or hair or something. So I think, well, that's probably finished now, and I have a good look at it. But I probably look at a painting for a good few hours before I'm totally decided it's finished. But normally you just know. You just look at something, you think that's it. It works. I don't need to do any more. Very, very occasionally will I go back and alter a painting. I only altered about 3 paintings. One was for a commission. Well, it's a funny story. It was for the Royal Navy, the Navy Days poster. Remember Navy Days? You probably don't. It's a big open day at the dockyard. And I was asked to do a poster for them. And they sent me a photograph of all these naval ships, which are grey. And oh, God, I thought, what am I going to do here? Anyway, in the corner of the picture was a little ship, a tug called Careful. So I painted the tug as the main picture for the Navy Days poster. And there were some quite funny references to the Navy in it, but that's a different story. Anyway, they saw it, and of course they weren't happy with it. But it stayed. They put it in the corridor, and the Admiral came along, and he laughed his head off it. He thought he was really good, and he phoned me up and invited me to dinner and said, "Yeah, you can use it." So we used it. He says, "But there's one condition: you change the Admiral. He's holding a ban the bomb balloon, which won't go down at a naval base that does a nuclear submarine. Could you paint that out?" So I painted it red. Anybody from the 60s, from the hippie age, would realise that that's a ban the bomb. So he was such a nice chap. I painted it out. No, the boat was black and a bright orange. It was a lovely, lovely study. And the tug master was so pleased, he invited me for a ride on the tug. Yeah, it's great. You get invited more places as a doctor, as an artist than you do as a doctor. You get invited to a lot of interesting places and meet interesting people. Interesting that was. That was something that was an eye opener. Yeah, I suppose it's almost like because everything I've done been science to do with science, yeah, I'm a bit obsessive about it. I suppose a lot of artists are obsessional about what they do. But yeah, I'm thinking of impact all the time. It's no use by doing a bright painting if you haven't got the contrast with the background right, or So colour's important, and that's why this style's great, because if you've got a building and it doesn't stand out, you just change the colour. I think as long as it communicates, I think colour's the first thing, and the thing a lot of people talk about. I don't paint because of that. I paint because it works for me. As an artist, you paint for yourself. If you sell things, then you're lucky. If you have to paint as a living, then it may be a bit different, but hopefully people are still painting what they enjoy. I do refuse certain commissions if they don't fit in with my style and what I want to do. I've painted over 2,000 paintings. I was having a look the other day, it's about 2,047. So it means I sold about 2,000 paintings. Yeah, this second coat makes all the difference. I think I'll change that over. I've got an interesting one I'm doing here, which is a small one. I love these wave patterns. They were inspired by contours, and it just gives movement and more interest, and it's simple to do. That's had about 4. That's had about 3 because it's on top of the blue. This has had 1, so that's probably going to need 3 altogether. But because I've got a tone, I've got to get these on before I leave the picture, because I'm never going to get the colour the same. It's because they're lazy, yeah. They're realising to make a good income. They're realising that they're working £15 an hour and they're better off working in Tesco. And you've got to have a business mind or understand business side. Get somebody to distribute, if you can get somebody to distribute your work to several galleries. And remember, you see, people say to me, you're making a fortune. I said, well look, I sell £1,000 painting. The gallery takes 50%, well it doesn't actually, but most galleries do. So that's 500. The taxman takes 40% of that. That's 300 left. I spent £50 on material and framing. I've got 200, well, you know. Obviously an exhibition. I don't have exhibitions very often, especially solo exhibitions. And I now tend to invite other artists who are perhaps not known to exhibit with me, to give them a bit of like a little step up the ladder if I can. I do a lot of mentoring of artists, you know, because it's very difficult in making money. How do you merchandise stuff where you do prints or cards? So I do quite a bit of that. The other thing I'm looking forward to is actually the Lighthouse Parade next year. I'm painting the other lighthouse because it's nice to see how people react to it. You know, it's nice standing by something and seeing what people say. And you know, a lot of people don't like my work, but I've been in a gallery where somebody who said, you know, oh, I don't think much of these. They're childlike, aren't they? Well, I said, oh, I don't know. I quite like them. He said, no, I wouldn't spend any money on these. They're expensive. I said, well, actually, I've got 30 of them at home. 30, he said. That must have cost you a fortune. I said, oh, no, he didn't actually. I painted them. And he sort of looked and walked away quickly. No, just to listen, stand there and listen. You know, when there's a chance for a bit of a joke, I'm quite happy to have it. I think he ended up buying one, actually.
You got that.